How we doing? Good. Happy almost end of the semester. I know maybe that's like happy for some, stressful for others. Those graduating. Well, welcome to a celebration of literature and living writers. My name is Megan Marshall. I'm the director of the QC High Living Writers Series. And this event represents the last of three celebrating National Poetry Month. And it is also our final event for the Living Writers Series of the spring semester, which is a little bittersweet, but we are concluding with an amazing, spectacular poet. So kind of going more toward ending on that sweet note. But before we get going, I do want to thank those who have helped to make this series and this particular event possible. That includes all of our friends at Love Library, Markle Tumlin, my fabulous co-host, and the Markle leads around the clock. All done and continues to do. Thank you, Markle. Also, other friends from Love Library, Danya Muka Hall, Laurel Bliss, and Rebecca Williamson. I'd also like to thank the Department of English and Comparative Literature and the College of Arts and Letters for their support of the series and this event, as well as Michael Ramirez and our friends from Aztec Shops who are selling books over there in the corner. And most importantly, I do want to acknowledge the space that we are privileged to share this evening. For millennia, the Kumeyaay people have been a part of this land. Land has nourished, healed, protected, and embraced them for many generations. And as members of the San Diego State University community, we acknowledge this legacy. All right, just a few final reminders. If you haven't done so already, please silence your cell phones. Thank you. And know that the event is being recorded, but don't worry, all we see is this side of the room. So not creating any other YouTube stars tonight. Okay. Without further ado, I am honored to introduce our featured reader for the evening. Rick Barot was born in the Philippines and grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. He has published 3 books of poetry with Sarabande Books: The Darker Fall, which received the Kathryn A. Morton Prize; Want, which was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Award and won the 2009 Grub Street Poetry Prize; and Chord, which was a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize and received the 2016 UNT Rilke Prize, the Penn Open Book Award, and the Publishing Triangle's Thom Gunn Award. His 4th book of poems, The Galleons, which he'll be partly sharing from tonight, was listed in the top 10 poetry books for 2020 by the New York Public Library, was a finalist for the Pacific Northwest Book Awards, and was on the long list for the National Book Award. His poems and essays have appeared in numerous publications, including Poetry, the Paris Review, the New Republic, Ploughshares, Tin House, the Kenyon Review, Virginia Quarterly Review, the New Yorker, among many others. Barot directs the Rainier Writing Workshop, which is a low-residency MFA in creative writing at Pacific Lutheran University. Of the purpose of art and poetry, the great poet Jane Hirshfield muses, art simplifies and selects, but does not reduce. It focuses concentration in order to see more fully at greater depth. I feel this observation aptly encapsulates Barot's own poetic aesthetic, in which focused concentration on commonplace things, a ladder, a helicopter, a walking stick, acts as conduit for deeper interrogation of the complexity and beauty of our paradoxical existence. But like the speaker in the poem Ode to Interruptions asserts, I used to think that to write poems, to make art, meant trying to transcend prosaic elements of the self, to arrive at some essential plane where poems were supposed to succeed. I was wrong. Barot's art of seeing more fully doesn't involve a grand reveal of life's meaning or purpose. It instead reminds us that the poetry of earth is a 90-year-old woman in front of a slot machine. It is a few words in the blue void. It is seeing things mostly as they are, which means a kind of health. Of this latest collection, Oliver de la Paz raves, The Galleons is significant, a work of a poet at the height of his powers. So we are lucky to bear witness to those powers tonight. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Rick Barot.
Hi, everybody. I always know I got a good introduction. I'm really embarrassed. I'm feeling very embarrassed right now. Thank you very much, Megan, for that, but also for all of the things you've done to make my visit possible. I mean, so much happens behind the scenes, and Megan is like the legs churning under the surface that looks very calm. And I want to thank Sandra and Blas for making me feel so welcome and inviting me here. Thank you both very much. I know you all know how lucky you are to have these amazing poets on the faculty, especially these two poets. So thank you to you both. I want to thank all of you for being here. You know, a poetry reading can't be a fun thing to do on a Wednesday night. You're missing something else. So thank you for having this instead. And I also think that any chance to gather and celebrate poetry, especially given, you know, the period of gloom that we have just been in and that we continue to be in, you know, gathering in this way feels not just sort of needed, but also just beautiful. So thank you for sharing this space with me. So I'm going to read for maybe about 30 or 45 minutes of poetry. And I know that there's a conversation that's planned for later, and I hope people are invited to that. Yeah. So I'm not going to have a regular Q&A after this, but I'll be around to chat with you. And so I'm going to read first some older work and then do some newer work. And the first poem I'm going to read is from a book called Chord. And this book was published in 2015. And this poem is called The Wooden Overcoat. And I need to mention that the title comes from, I was reading a novel by Ivan Doig, who is a great Pacific Northwest writer based in Montana, I believe. And the novel was about mining in the 19th century in Montana. And one of the miners used the phrase, the wooden overcoat, to talk about a coffin. So I thought that was a very interesting phrase, and I thought I would use it for this poem. The wooden overcoat. It turns out that there's a difference between a detail and an image. If a dandelion on the sidewalk is mere detail, the dandelion inked on a friend's bicep is an image because it moves when her body does, even when a shirt covers up the little black sun on a thin stalk. The same way that the barcode on the back of another friend's neck is just a detail, until you hear that the row of numbers underneath are the numbers his grandfather got on his arm in a camp in Poland. Then it's an image, something activated in the reader's senses beyond mere fact. I know the difference doesn't really matter, except in poetry, where a coffin is just another coffin until someone at a funeral calls it the wooden overcoat, an image so heavy and warm at the same time that you forget it's about death. At my uncle's funeral, the coffin was so beautiful. It was like the chandelier lighting the room where treaties are signed. It made me think of how loved he was. It made me think of Shoshone funerals, where everything the dead person owned was put into a bonfire, even their horse. And that last sentence, is the horse a detail or an image? I don't really know. In my mind, a horse is never anywhere near a fire, and a detail is as luminous as an image. The trumpet vine, the fence, the clothes, the fire. I really like doing readings where you can sort of hear the outside world trying to bark. Kind of like disabuses you the notion that poetry is this big deal. Not. I'm sure they're talking about important stuff over there. So I'm going to turn to some poems from my most recent book, The Galleons. And this first poem is called The Girl Carrying a Ladder. And I don't think I need to say anything about it beyond there's a luxury brand that is referenced in this poem, and that brand is Louis Vuitton. So this is my Louis Vuitton poem. Everybody needs to write one. The Girl Carrying a Ladder. On the same day, I read about the luxury goods company that has produced a punching bag you can buy for $175,000. I see the photograph of the Palestinian girl who carries a ladder with her each morning when she goes to school. To scale the wall of my own understanding of why a punching bag would cost so much, I have to think about why I'm attracted to that punching bag the way some people are attracted to pink kittens, or the way some people are attracted to camouflage, or the way some people are attracted to their gods. I want that punching bag the way the girl carrying the ladder wants to go to school. Relentless, single-minded, and absurd. Carrying the ladder that is twice or three times as tall as she is, leaning the ladder against the wall that separates her from her school. The girl goes up the ladder as though it were something she did every day, which she does. When I think of a punching bag, I think of sex. When I think of a ladder, I think of picking apples. When I think of the girl carrying the ladder to go to school, I think of the neighborhood girls carrying pink camouflage backpacks, not knowing about the armies that the camouflage stands for. The logo of that luxury brand is printed all over the punching bag the way camouflage is all over us. Camouflage bed sheets, camouflage cell phone covers, camouflage shirts in neon colors that everyone wears, even the people who vote against guns. We live in paradox and we prosper. We live in paradox and we thrive. What I can't figure out is how the girl deals with the barbed wire at the top of the wall she has to go over, or what her ladder weighs, or what she does with the ladder when she gets to school. Does she put it against the wall with the other ladders, the way kids put their bikes in bike racks at school? What I can't figure out is why two men who look like gods would want to break down the wall of each other's faces, knowing there's only blood on the other side, or why apples are the fruit children bring their teachers, and why it isn't coconuts or grapefruit, or why the neighborhood girls on their way to school each morning carry backpacks that are so heavy, it looks like they're carrying the world. So I'm noticing some people reading along in the book with the poems that I'm reading. I want to mention that the versions that I'm reading are not exactly the same as the versions in the book. And so I'm not going to tell you why. You can ask me about that later on. There's a good reason there. So the title poem for my book, The Galleons, it's comprised of 10 poems scattered through the book. And what I'd like to do is read the first and the final poems from that 10 poem sequence. So this book is ostensibly an elegy for my grandmother who died in 2016 at 92 years old. And so she's the woman who's referred to in this first section. And this is called The Galleons 1. Is this good, by the way, volume-wise? Can you all hear me? Good. The Galleons 1. Her story is a part of something larger. It is a part of history. No, her story is an illumination of history, a matchstick lit in the black seam of time. Or no, her story is separate from the whole, as distinct as each person is distinct from the stream of people that led to the one and leads past the one. Or her story is surrounded by history, the ambient spaciousness of which she is the momentary foreground. Maybe history is a net through which just about everything passes, and the pieces of her story are particles caught in the net. Or her story is a contradiction, something ordinary that has no part in history at all. If history is about what is included, about what is made important. History is the galleon in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, in the middle of the 16th century, swaying like a drunk who will take 6 months to finally reach his house. She is on another ship, centuries later, on a journey eastward that will take weeks across the same ocean. The war is over, though her husband is still in his officer's uniform, small but confident among the tall white officers. Her hair is marcelled like a movie star's waves, though she has been too sick with the water's motion to know that anyone sees her. Her daughter is 2, the blur of need at the center of each day's incessant rocking. Here is a ship, an ocean. Here is a figure, her story a few words in the blue void. So that poem came out of, I wonder if you all have this, like, for every important person in your life, you have a kind of, like an iconic image of them. And this is, that poem came out of the image of my grandmother crossing the Pacific Ocean after World War II, 24 years old, already a mother, and crossing the Pacific, taking 2 weeks or so to do that. And just the kind of the incredible drama of that image in my mind, even though, I've known her for a very long time, that's the image that I keep returning to. So I wonder for the poets out there, think about the people in your life, and if there's a poem that can be drawn from that iconic image that you have of them. That's an assignment. So the next poem is the last poem in the sequence, and this is the Galleons 10. And as Megan mentioned, I was born in the Philippines, and we immigrated here when I was 10 years old. And so this poem is about my Filipino heritage and also my childhood in the Philippines. The Galleons 10. I come from the lowlands. My mother's city was built on the river where the mountains fanned out to the sea, and the city thrived there. I come from farmers. I come from childhood's green radio, from the calachuchi tree and its white flowers. I come from prayer. My parents took me to a faith healer once, though no one now recalls the malady or the terms of the cure. I had a faith. It took me across an ocean. It has taken half a life to turn back and see what it was I left behind. I come from teachers and soldiers. From the island where my father comes from, the people covered their bodies with tattoos. I come from soot. I come from ink. I come from people who honed their teeth to sharp points, who buried their dead in coffins shaped like boats for a journey. I come from horizon. I come from water. This next poem is called Cascades 501, and that's the name of the Amtrak train that I used to take quite often before the pandemic. It goes, Cascades 501, or the Coast Starlight, that's the name of the line. And I think it starts in LA and goes all the way up to Vancouver, British Columbia. And so it's a kind of an East Coast Amtrak. And so this is about a portion of that I took quite often between Tacoma, where I live, and Portland, Oregon, which I used to visit a lot. So this is a kind of ode or homage to this piece of landscape. Cascades 501. The man sitting behind me is telling the man sitting next to him about his heart bypass. Outside the train's window, the landscapes smear by, the earnest, haphazard distillations of America, the backyards and backsides of houses, the back lots of shops and factories, the underpasses of bridges, and then the stretches of actual land, which is not so much land, but the kinds of watercourses and greenery that register like luck in the mind. Dense walls of trees, hunky little woods, the living continually outgrowing the fallen and decaying, the vines and ivies taking over everything, proving that the force of disorder is also the force of plenty. Then the eye dilating to the sudden clearings, fields, meadows, the bogs that must have been left behind by retreating glaciers, the creeks, the algae broth of ponds. Then the broad silver of rivers, shiny as subway turnstiles, attrition, dispersal, growth, a system unfastened to story, as though the green site itself was beyond story, was peacefully beyond any clear meaning. But why the gust of alertness that comes to me every time any indication of the human passes into sight? Like a mirror, like to like, even though I am not the summer backyard with the orange soccer ball resting there, even though I am not the pickup truck parked askew in the back lot, its two doors opened wide, and no one around to show whether it is funny or an emergency that the truck is like that. Each thing looks new, even when it is old and broken down. They had to open me up, the man is now telling the other man. I wasn't there to see it, but they opened me up. How are y'all doing? You should all also write the train poem. I think there's this list of like subjects that every poet I think needs to tackle, like the train poem, the Greyhound bus poem. So this final poem that I'm going to read from the Galleons is an ode to the beautiful old house in Oakland, California, where I spent part of my growing up. And my parents still live in this house. It's by Lake Merritt. And so we've been in this house for about 40 years now. And the house itself is over 100 years old. So this poem is really about the different lives that haunt this house. And they're not lives of other people. They're like lives, my earlier lives. It's a house that I've been in and out of for decades. So this is a kind of a meditation on that haunting. This is called Ode with Interruptions. Someone is in the kitchen washing the dishes. Someone is in the living room watching the news. Someone in a bedroom is holding a used stamp with tweezers and adding it to his collection. Someone is scolding a dog, barking now for decades, a different dog for each of the decades. Someone is reading the paper and listening to a baseball game on the radio at the same time. At the base of the altar, you drop some coins into a wooden box, and the lights reveal the vast, worn painting in front of you. The holy subject is illuminated for a few minutes before it is dim again. There are churches all over Italy where you can do this. The smell of incense, stone. Someone is taking the ashes out of the small cave of the fireplace, though this might have been 100 years ago when the house was new and we didn't live in it. Someone is writing a letter on thin blue paper. Someone is putting down the needle onto a spinning record, just so. On the couch, someone is sleeping. Upstairs, someone is looking into the bathroom mirror. While we were waiting for her surgery to finish, I walked around the hospital and came across a waiting room that had an enormous aquarium. The blackfish with red stripes, the yellowfish with blue stripes, the triangle fish, the cylinder fish, the little orange schools, and the cellophane glints of their quick turns in the box of water, among arrangements of coral, that city of bones. Someone is walking down the creaking staircase in the dark, a hand sliding on the rail. Someone is on the telephone, which means nobody else can use it for another hour. Someone in his room is doing homework, me or someone almost like me, 20, 50 years ago. Someone is reading in her room. Someone is talking to the gray wall. Someone is talking to the gray wall. In summer, on a hot afternoon, someone peels at a corner of wallpaper and sees only more wallpaper beneath. I used to think that to write poems, to make art, meant trying to transcend the prosaic elements of the self, to arrive at some essential plane where poems were supposed to succeed. I was wrong. So I'm going to shift to something new-ish. At the start of the pandemic, many people I know were not able to write. They were really frozen with just anxiety and fear during that time. But I went crazy. I started writing. And the project that eventually came out of this early pandemic writing was a series of 30 short prose poems that I wrote about the experience of being in that early and truly terrifying period. And so this sequence was eventually published as a chapbook titled During the Pandemic. And so I'm going to read a number of these sections. And you're going to know that I'm starting a new poem because each poem begins with the phrase, during the pandemic. During the pandemic, I fixed on each fear. Each fear was its own fastidiousness. My mother and her fear of the ocean, not even a touch of it, not even her feet in the tender edge of surf. My friend and his fear of tunnels, going through them with his eyes closed. When we went outside, we wore latex gloves, the colors of Easter. We stood apart in the mandated distance, like the last pieces at the end of a game of chess. During the pandemic, I kept a list of possible symptoms on the refrigerator door. From a distance, it looked like a shopping list, an ersatz normalcy, fever instead of flour, cough instead of bacon, fatigue instead of milk. With each day, the slippages proliferated. Hospital instead of hospitality, projections instead of protections, virus instead of virtue. Asymptomatic veered towards asymptote, an intimate infinity between them. During the pandemic, I looked out the window at the moment a runner went by. His stride had an exaggerated beauty, like everything that was outside of my mind. The blue recycling dumpster, the white cereal bowl, the pink full moon. Inside my mind was woe, an attic full of gray insulation. During the pandemic, I knew we were in a period of interval, so I considered what an interval meant. The interval we were in was not like swinging in a hammock on a warm afternoon. It was not like making a lesson plan to be taught. It was not even like being inside a car wash and its cleansing tempest. It was more like lucky speech in the middle of Beckett's play, its torrent of rage and grief, after which the waiting, which was the point after all, resumed. During the pandemic, I wanted to take up as little space as possible. Wake, wash, eat, clean, watch, lie. I wanted all of my habits reduced to a ritual of monosyllables. The painter said, "A skull is a beautiful structure and used to waiting." I admired the painter's suave severity, that grim style. Now that isolation and obedience were what I knew of refuge. During the pandemic, I thought of scale. Pandemics I read had shaped human history from the start, like lava scorching an old landscape with regularity. That was one kind of scale. The tweet from the man announcing his wife's death from the virus was another kind of scale. Soft, the size of my face, the mask I wore to the store was one kind of scale. The racist violence being done to people who looked like me, this was another kind of scale. A scholar wrote, "The poem is the speech of citizenship," and I laughed. During the pandemic, I went outside as into an abstraction. Every body was a vector. Every public space was a possible inflection point. The very air was a moral injury. But there is no abstracting this. The bus driver died, the shoemaker, the chef, the playwright, the nurses and the doctors, the ambassador, the princess, the leader of the band, the scholar of Derrida. During the pandemic, I praised the cherry blossoms. I praised my lungs. I praised crying. I praised the faces of my students checkerboarded on the computer screen. I praised the curses I gave to those who deserve them. I praised coffee. I praised ventilators. I praised the people gathered on the rooftop of a nearby building, laughing as they looked up at the night sky. So those are from that pandemic sequence. I always worry reading those that they are somehow triggering. I mean, we're still in it, but the darkest part of it, we seem to be out of that. And yet, every time I read that part about, do you remember there was a time when we were all wearing gloves just to do anything? So I'm going to close my reading with another new poem. I'm so excited that I have a new poem coming out next year. And this is one of the poems from that book. And this is called The Field. Thank you all so much for listening. The Field. Two people are asleep in a field. The light is not yet up. The air is cold, even though it is summer. I cannot get closer than where I am. I know only so much about them. I know they are not dead. I know they are asleep because one of them has moved, just enough to show it is a movement you make in sleep, an adjustment of resting weight. I don't know if it is romantic that they are in this field, or if it is because of drunkenness or despair. From this distance, their clothes are black. They are two men, or a man and a woman, or two women. I'm not near enough to learn what their bodies are, or how proximate or distant from each other. It is a corner of my eye that has seen them, walking quickly past. It is a corner of my mind that has seen them, a startled glance, and then that glance widening. They don't have belongings, no things that speak of displacement. The field is askew with untended grass, except where they have flattened it. Have they been here the full length of the night, or just the previous hour? Who are they for whom the grass is a bed? Who are those others elsewhere, sleeping in the open back of a truck, or on the ground behind a guarded fence. I am walking in the countryside, so maybe they are people of myth, or they are people of a labor I know nothing about. There are birds singing to the dawn. There's the sound of a big wheel rolling somewhere. There are trees as tall as parents, but they have not slept under them. In the dark, alone, I went out to see the turn towards morning. Then I saw them. What the imagination would do with two people sleeping in a field is to keep them where they are, unknowable, untouched. The imagination also wants them to stir, to wake them back into their stories. The day will be hot. The smell of yesterday's heat is still in the air, like the sweat of a body. What would bring me to a field in the night and have me sleep there? Whose hand would I be holding, out of desire or fear? My pants' hems are heavy with dew. I know how far away I am from everyone. Am I a child again? Am I old? Or am I only who I am now, astounded at the transport of the body from one end of time to another? Thank you all very much.
I mean, let's just keep going right there. We have copies of the Galleons for sale back there in the corner. You know, you need to add something to your summer reading list. And also, if you get lonely, you know, you're pining for some living writers, please feel free to check us out on YouTube. We have recordings of most of our events. We also have wonderful content created by students. And then if you want to keep this conversation going, you're welcome to join us for a Q&A with Rick right across the hallway in room 408 in about 10 minutes. If not, thank you so much for coming, and we hope to see you next semester. Thank you.